I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, can you hear me?
I can. How are we doing today?
I'm doing okay. I had a little bit of a COVID scare where I was around someone who tested positive, which is why I'm in the garage. We haven't done one live from my garage in a while, and here we are. But no symptoms in the family. I'm feeling great. So we're kind of at the end of our quarantine period. But just to be on the safe side today, we decided to do it from the nice cold garage.
That's right. No one can tell how cold it is for you out there.
It's chilly. It's not as bad as it could have been. I mean, Sunday I was out here and man, that was in the teens, and
Yeah, you do a
that
lot of
was a little.
broadcasting from your garage, and it's usually
Yeah,
stocking cap, maybe a hoodie, or
yeah. Not today. So our
or
guest today, let's dive right in. Our guest is Representative Laurie Trahan, who is just elected to her second term, or just started her second term in the House of Representatives. Laurie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Doug.
Okay, so let's dive right in. You were there on January 6th, so and not everybody watching will have known what it was like for you. So just in short, let's explain to us what you went through on that day and what your experiences were.
Yeah, so uh, it's hard even to recount that day still. I wasn't in the gallery because we were sort of instructed because of COVID to not go into the House gallery unless we were speaking on one of the challenges to the Electoral College, vote counts. So I was in my office just days before, actually the day before, I was there with my whole family, my husband and my two young daughters, 6 and 10. We drove down on Saturday and sort of celebrated the swearing into my second term. But you didn't need to read any intelligence reports to know that something was changing in the air down in Washington. We, of course, and fortunately made the decision for my husband to take my kids home. They flew out on Tuesday afternoon. And I think what was just running through my mind as I was watching folks storm the Capitol was like, we were just on those steps with my two young daughters, and the juxtaposition of those two images it made me sad, of course. I was alarmed, as anybody was. And then I was angry. I mean, it was, there's no question that, what happened on January 6th, it was, it was an act of domestic terrorism. I mean, it was an attack on our democracy. It tried to disrupt the obligation that House members have to certify our election results. And I was, outraged and resolved that was still going to happen, no matter how long it took to contain the violence. We were still going to go back to the House floor and do the job that needed to be done. And I think at that moment, the Americans needed to see that. They needed to see that democracy was going to prevail, that this was not going to, take down the certification of the election, and also the everything that the Capitol stands for. So it was a
Yeah,
full range of emotions that day.
sure. Now time has passed.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, I would say in general, the mood as someone who's kind of in quarantine is the mood is softened somewhat nationally. And there seems to be a palpable change in the air. But at the same time, I'm not experiencing sort of security issues. I'm not hearing about these, new details about the pipe bombs or outside the RNC and the DNC. Is there any new information? Is there anything that's changing your perspective on your end?
No, I think that there's a lot at play right now. Of course, there are a lot of investigations into what exactly went wrong. I mean, I think most immediately we saw a change in leadership with the Sergeant at Arms and with the U.S. Capitol Police, and hearings have already started. There was a hearing yesterday in terms of getting at what exactly happened. And that is going to continue. I mean, the security forces are going to continue. I mean, certainly I was down there for the inauguration on the 20th, and it was a different place. There were thousands, 22,000 National Guardsmen and women standing at posts around the Capitol complex to ensure that we could have an inauguration. And so, so many of those folks are still there, and they will be for the foreseeable future. I think the thing that's important, I mean, you're right to mention that as time goes by, maybe folks are feeling like, the urgency has subsided, or maybe we should be moving toward, unity. And what I would say is you can't have unity without accountability. It doesn't matter if it's the first day of a presidency or the last. If a president commits an impeachable offense, Congress has an obligation to intervene and hold them accountable. And there's no question that Donald Trump incited a violent mob to commit an act of insurrection when they attacked the United States Capitol. And so they assaulted police officers. They ransacked the seat of our democracy. They hunted down members of Congress in a failed attempt to overthrow our democratic process. And he did nothing to stop the violence in the moment. So I think it's really important, if we are going to heal as a country, that we take this important step, that the Senate has a trial, and that, they convict him. I think that this is an extremely dangerous situation. It's one where not only does the president need to be held accountable, but he should never be allowed to hold the office of presidency again. And that's exactly what impeachment is there to protect.
What about other members of the House and Senate? You've been very critical of people who've been spreading false narratives and false news and disinformation. What do you do about that?
There are elected officials, and I don't mind naming folks like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, Matt Gaetz, who is a representative from Florida. I mean, they went above and beyond to do Donald Trump's bidding for the past 2.5 months. They pandered to their base. They spread dangerous disinformation and flat out lies about the 2020 election, telling them that they needed to fight to save our country. And they bear just as much responsibility for the violent insurrection as Donald Trump does. So, you can't have folks going to the floor of the People's House and spreading conspiracy theories and spreading lies. Because if we're actually going to get at the media ecosystem that promotes the dissemination of these conspiracy theories and these lies, then we have to hold elected officials accountable for what they say on the House floor or at rallies and what they do. Otherwise, it's just a vicious cycle where one can claim they're reporting on the other. But we're hearing some pretty alarming stories right now about, some members of Congress who are alleged to have given tours to some of the very people who attacked us. And it's clear that we need top to bottom investigation on all of these allegations because, members need to be held accountable. If we're going to proceed with impeaching a president, and there's a role that other lawmakers, played in this insurrection, they need to be held responsible as well.
Okay. So speaking of the media ecosystem, you have been critical of Section 230, and people talk a lot about 230. So I want to make sure people listening are like, Section 230, what's that? Section 230 was part of the Communications Decency Act, which which came out in 1996. It's the only part left. Everything else in the CDA was ruled unconstitutional. And it seems like this not very important thing, 26 words, right? But there's this book about it called 26 Words That Created the Internet. It was Section 230 that allowed for Facebook and Google and Twitter and even stuff like Yelp to become what it eventually became, right? Because it protects places like Facebook from third-party content providers, people like me getting on there and saying things. So I can say something kind of crazy and outrageous. It's my fault. It's not the fault of Facebook. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. I think that the truth is Section 230 is fundamentally flawed in the sense that it actually incentivizes social media companies in particular to let disinformation spread like wildfire across their platforms because it increases engagement, which in the end equals increased, revenue and profitability. And that's not just a problem with right-wing extremisms, that's a problem that poses a serious threat to the future of our democracy. So I do think it's time for elected officials to stop looking at this through partisan lenses and start acknowledging the serious issues that social media and big tech companies have created in their pursuit of obscene profitability. And, I'll even go one step further. I mean, certainly Section 230 gets a lot of attention these days, but I've got 6 and 10-year-old daughters. I mean, I am alarmed that there are no guardrails in place for how their data is collected, how content is targeted to them. I know how powerful those algorithms are. And by design, these devices are meant to keep your eyeballs firmly locked on the device. I mean, it is, we see it play out in our homes every day. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but I will give you the warning since your kids are much younger. It is alarming to see that there are no, and we cannot leave it to the tech companies to self-govern here. We need to put up guardrails. We need to protect our children. So yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into that. I just got onto the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has direct jurisdiction over these very issues, and I'm as a mom, as a legislator, as someone who wants to protect free speech, but also our democratic institutions. We have to address this immediately.
Yeah, well, how do you do this while protecting freedom of speech? I mean, there's already some guardrails in place within Section 230, like human trafficking and copyright. And, I can't just post, some novel that just came out a year ago on my Facebook page. So I'm just wondering, how do you go about doing this and still let people it's easy enough for the people who want to post pictures of cats and post pictures of kids and local, sports games. And, freedom of speech is important when you're protecting dissenters, right? And people who are kind of outliers who might have some sort of unpopular opinion. How do you protect the people who have these, divisive, unpopular opinions?
It's tricky. And, Congress has to address that the current digital and social media ecosystem locks people into echo chambers where they're essentially force-fed disinformation that confirms their own bias. I mean, you bring up, I think everyone out there has, that uncle or aunt who spends most of their day on Facebook sharing some of the most outlandish conspiracy theories we've ever heard of, and perhaps even picking fights with their friends and family. But I firmly don't believe that most of these folks are trying to gaslight us. It's that where it's that it's what they're seeing in their feeds is creating an entirely different, completely detached reality. And so we know that's because big tech corporations have figured out how to maximize their business model, right? Their profits. They can use algorithms that keep people using their services and their devices, which means that they can be targeting us with content and ads for a price. But the downside, of course, is that a disinformation wedge is driven between the American people. And I think folks are siloed away in their own reality where all they hear is what they want. And so we got to just get to truth. I'll just give you a perfect example. I went back to the floor of the House after the January 6th attacks, and I heard, my colleague from Florida, Congressman Gates, just let it leak out that it's already been reported that Antifa was responsible for the siege on the Capitol. Now, that story was completely inaccurate, but because he said it, I was on a flight the next day with so many of the people who were, storming the Capitol, and just reacting to my newspaper headlines that I was holding in my hands, not even as, as a representative. They were sort of targeting me. That was Antifa. And you see how dangerous that can be when you walk away from truth, when you let different versions of truth sort of be validated, especially by our lawmakers. There's got to be an accounting for that. And I think it's going to come from both ends. It's not just social media companies, but it's also, the media ecosystem that supports that. And then also our lawmakers, so that they're not able to just casually speak about, or speak lies on the floor.
Yeah. Once we had these guardrails in place, can we imagine what social media is going to look like? And because there's a difference in kind between, say, what Facebook or Twitter does and what we do as a local magazine, right? If our food critic trashes a local restaurant, we have some liability there. But we also don't have 3,000 food critics posting every minute, right? Do these changes change social media in a way that it's unrecognizable, right? Because of scalability, because of the size of the information.
We always knew that this was going to be the case with, user generated content, right? It was always, in its very best form, when you have, these recommendation engines, or when you have relevance, you are surrounded by content that you like. We all have, as a mom, I'm chased around the internet by the shopping cart that I haven't checked out yet. In times that's valuable to folks, but at its worst, it does create echo chambers where the only thing you start to see are things that confirm your own bias. And if at a young age you're impressionable and you haven't sort of looked at things objectively and you're already being put down a rat hole, there's no getting out of that. And so, yes, we do have to look at data collection, data storage, who owns that data. Long ago in its infancy, there was always talk about how that data should be transparent to a consumer, that they should be able to see why they're seeing certain recommendations or advertisements or content. I think it's all on the table. We have to get this right. Facebook and Twitter, and they are on their best day a cause for good, right? I'm connected, especially during the pandemic, with so many people that I can't physically, go and visit and speak in front of or share information with, and that is a great thing. However, there is also a dark side, which we are also feeling right now, and it manifested in an attack on our U.S. Capitol just a couple of weeks ago. So do I know exactly what form this is going to take? No. Am I committed to having exhaustive hearings so that we can get this right and we can protect our democracy, and we can protect our children, and we can just protect the future of how information is shared and what people can trust and shouldn't? You bet.
So Biden's been in office for 7 days now, believe it or not. I know with the news cycle, is it longer, is it shorter? It's been 7 days, and there's been a flurry of executive orders. Are any of these particularly exciting to you, or you see as particularly positive?
Absolutely. I'm glad to see the executive order, used in this way. Certainly, there were a lot of things that we wanted to roll back. Personally, I wanted to see us get back to our global leadership, fighting the climate crisis. Wanted to see, the Muslim travel ban repealed, the transgender ban in our military. There are so many things that we just had to fix, and this president, prioritized them on day one. And look, the reason why it feels like he's been in office a lot longer than the 7 days is because there's been a flurry of activity coming out of the White House, which we haven't had in 4 years. And so I do think that this is an important moment. We have to, we have a lot of work to do. There are so many issues confronting our country. And when you think about the moment we're living in with COVID and the importance of accelerating our vaccine distribution and our testing protocols, that is where this administration is focused. And that's where we actually have to make the most dramatic transformation in these first 100 days so that we can, get our economy back. We can get kids back to school. We can have consumer confidence built back, and we can start, getting to something that feels familiar again.
So in December, the Great American Outdoors Act was passed. Tremendous bipartisan support. You were just down at Minuteman National Park last week, I think, with the announcement. What does that mean for the Merrimack Valley and the regions around the Merrimack Valley? Why is this important?
Well, it's important because for too long, Washington has, divested from conservation efforts, and we've neglected the need for maintenance upgrades at national parks across the country. I mean, it literally caused an accumulation of a $22 billion deferred maintenance backlog at our national parks. And I was at Minuteman National Park just this week, and of course, the Lowell National Historic Park. I grew up going to, but in all, there's $244.5 million, here in at parks of deferred maintenance backlog at parks here in the Commonwealth, 20 million here in the district that I represent alone. So it was a bright light. Last summer, we took up and we passed the bipartisan Great American Outdoors Act to finally change this pattern of divestment. And these are our precious public lands. These are our national parks, which have become so important, especially during this pandemic, as people seek to, go outside and get fresh air and, discover, in many cases, rediscover recreation that's right in their backyard. But this legislation permanently and fully funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that's our country's most successful conservation program that supports everything from local playgrounds to national park expansions. And it actually establishes a restoration fund to provide critical federal investments in the National Park Service, and finally close this deferred maintenance log. So, I was joined down at Minuteman with Heather McMahon from Groundwork Lawrence, and they do unbelievable work in the city of Lawrence. And, we know how important the Land and Water Conservation Fund is, especially for urban kids to get outside, to go on these, rail trails and these river walks. It's the Circuit Bay Trail. All of these resources need to be preserved and maintained so that they are there for generations to come.
What about the river? You sponsored the Stop Sewage Overflow Act. So this is not a new issue for you. You've been interested in conservation issues for a long time. What's next? What's next for the river in particular?
Yeah, so we are, every community along the Merrimack River knows just how serious combined sewage overflow is and how long it's taken for serious action to finally happen to address it. The numbers are just shocking, right? There's an average of 550 million gallons of, raw sewage released into the Merrimack River every year. And sometimes that reaches, dangerous levels on a day, like when we have a lot of rain. And so we've been able to work on solutions at all levels of government with incredible partners. Certainly in Congress, I get to work with Representatives Moulton and Chris Pappas from Manchester, Annie Custer from Nashua, but also with our Merrimack Valley State Delegation. And clearly the organizations, your outside groups like the Merrimack River Watershed Council and the Massachusetts River Alliance, they've been unbelievable partners. But we have to get the federal government to shift from loans, or thinking about this in terms of loans, to grants. And the federal government has done this. We have made investments in water infrastructure in the past. And the reality is the communities that are having the hardest trouble keeping up with the maintenance and with the upgrading of this infrastructure are the communities that can afford it the least. And so that is why we got legislation passed in the House as part of our infrastructure package last July. The Senate, sadly, like it did with so many of the bills, they did not move on it. But while we weren't able to get it across the finish line last year, we know that the Biden-Harris administration plans to make infrastructure a top priority this year. Given the bipartisan agreement that we already have, this is so necessary. So, I'm confident that, we're going to get combined sewage overflow, our Stop Sewage Overflow Act, into the infrastructure package, in the first half of this year.
Great. So we're almost out of time. I have a two-part final question for you. Getting into your Merrimack Valley roots, you went to Lowell High School.
Yeah.
So that, are you class of 91?
Yes, I
Did
am.
I get it right? Okay, class 91. I'm a year older than you are. My question is, when did you begin to realize that you had political ambitions? Was there something going on in high school where you were like, there's something here for me?
So I was president of, student government in high school, and I was president of National Honor Society, and certainly being involved and being engaged in my community was always a value, even in my family. My father was a union iron worker and organizer, and, we were, we're involved. Maybe there were some, roots that were planted then. I have to say, I attribute a lot to just the discourse that happened in my family. I mean, at the age of 11, I had a paper route, and I had a very big one. But, my father was very adamant about, at dinner time, us sitting around the table and us, talking about a current event. And so reading the newspaper was required in our house so that we could, have a stimulating discussion. And sometimes those discussions lasted hours and hours, but never had myself running for office. I worked on the Hill for almost 10 years and kind of ruled it out when I made the pivot to go to the private sector. But I have to say, 2016, I think it sparked something not just inside me. I mean, thousands of other women also, ran. But for me, it was definitely, this country is going in the wrong direction. We need a country that respects and elevates, my daughters. And I wanted to, I think that was the moment where getting off the sidelines became a moment of clarity for me.
Yeah. So speaking of your daughters, this is the second part of the question. Because everything is so divisive, right? And because because everything's happened, even so far this year, everything on January 6th, they get a little bit older and they say, hey, I want to go into politics. You say, I don't know. Have you considered marine biology? Like, would you encourage them to go down a path into the political field?
Yes, I would. Look, I think public service is a very noble career path, and it's one where we need more people sort of engaged, and that's at all levels of government, and it's also in and around government. I mean, I look at the activists that have really kept issues top of mind for so many communities, for people, like me. And there is a whole ecosystem that I think is what it's what feeds this democracy, right? And so, certainly whatever my children decide to pursue, I hope to give them good advice and, steer them in the right direction. But I would never, dissuade anybody from, serving in government.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you coming on the program. I'm very happy that our monitors didn't freeze. I was so worried about technical issues. But thanks for coming on the 495. Very, very much appreciated.
Thank
you. I'm gonna see everybody next week.
And hopefully you're not in the garage.
Yes. Yeah. I'll be back at the radio station in Methuen. All right.
You take care.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.